we are on. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome to another episodes of the Uru Labs podcast from Bengaluru. Ever complain how bad our cities are, how bad your commute is? You will get to hear from people who are working to solve these problems in their own way, right? This is your weekly soapbox for urban sustainability. So don't forget to like, subscribe and share these videos. It will help us a lot. I'm your host Satya Shankaran. Nirav is not in the house today. And on the show today, we will be speaking with Venugopal AV. As a part of ITDP, he has been supporting the National Smart Cities mission of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs for the India Cycles for Change and Streets for People challenges since June 2020. He has been leading the teams there, which has been doing these things. Through these initiatives, ITDP and Venu have been guiding almost around 100 cities across India to create safer, healthier, happier streets and public spaces. Welcome to the podcast, Venu.
Thank you, Satya. Thanks for the introduction and looking forward to the discussion. It's been interesting to listen into some of the other podcasts that we've had so far. So, yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, everyone has heard of the smart cities and have their own opinion of them. As citizens, we just think whatever they are from the outside. You have been working with them, of course, specifically with certain challenges, not broadly in everything else. But and you may think differently from the general public because you have worked with them, and whereas citizens look at it from the outside. The question we are asking today is: do smart cities work for India? What do you think?
Sure. I don't see this as a one bullet straightforward answer of yes or a no, because the whole urban governance space, I think it's an extremely challenging space where many decision makers, organizations like us, champions like you yourself, have been working in the gray space to address the situation. So first, to just break it down for your audience as well, of Smart Cities mission itself that was conceived in 2015. There has been a yearly budget that's allocated for the same. And in a nutshell, it was conceived so that cities develop proposals to apply for the smart city. So in different batches, cities were selected, and today we have around 100 smart cities across the country that are there. Each city, when they submitted a proposal, they had to identify what that city's core focus or vision is, and a set of projects, infrastructure projects ranging from mobility, health, education, sanitation. Multiple projects were identified, the budgets mapped to it, etc. They could revise or add to it on the go. And the essence that was underlined was the importance of citizen participation and importance of setting processes in place so that it can sustain over a period of time. And all the cities across India, especially the cities that were growing and big in nature, had a smart city ABD area, which is area-based development, a small area that was selected. So if you look at Bengaluru, Chennai, or other cities, or Kochi, you have an ABD area that's selected. So the smart cities projects were not applicable per se to the entire city. However, cities like, let's say, a new town, Kolkata, which is much smaller in scale, I think less than 50 square kilometers or so. For them, the ABD was the entire city itself. So there was a difference there. So the idea was to conceive the projects that's once it's selected to become part of the Smart Cities mission, to bring on board good consultants or designers, develop designs, oversee implementation, and see through. So to get to your question about whether it works in the Indian context or not, I think some cities or many cities have gotten many projects right. And if you look at the impacts that they have created from the perspective of such projects not having been there in the past in the Indian cities, if you look at the street space, walking, cycling, public transportation infrastructure itself, the dialogue has been going on for a decade plus. There have been a few projects here and there. But even in Chennai, because I'm based in Chennai and I've worked with the smart cities here, the smart cities mission and the funding and the nudge really helped the Pondi Bazaar pedestrian project, which is a conversation in itself for later. It was in a limbo for a long period of time, but it really helped push that project through when it got absorbed into the smart cities mission, and to see through and if you've been there today, you can see how it's a one-of-a-kind project, and now it has sparked a snowball effect for the Mega Streets project, where around 100 kilometers across the city is now being taken up. The DPRs are in the process of completion, and implementation will soon begin. So it has certainly been a test lab of sorts, which is what the Joint Secretary Kunal Kumar also often mentions, for cities to test out different concepts under these different urban verticals to see what has worked, be open to failure as well, to understand what the learnings are, and then to see how it can be scaled up. So different layers like integrated command control centers, better healthcare, sanitation facilities, etc., are different ideas that were tested. But I think a lot of criticism that has come, many of which is valid also, in the way that some projects were identified, the lack of transparency in some cases, the intent of citizen participation not being embraced as much, etc., would be valid in some cases, and I think it will have to be looked at city and project specific. But uh, personally, my reflection is that I think better communication from the national, state, city governments on the intent of the mission itself, how they approached it and perceived it, to the public may have helped address the public also to understand how this project is being perceived from. Because the moment you say smart cities, technology, you have symbols of Wi-Fi and technology put everywhere in dialogues and communication, it paints a different picture. And I think the communication itself improved in my perception over the last year, couple of years, where this intent has been shared a little more better. Cities are also understanding that. So it certainly has set the ball rolling for many cities. And after having spoken to a bunch of smart city working team members also, they really wish that the model continues now over a period of time, because it's now that they have also understood the value add that it brings to the city, what it can do, the potential it brings, and all that. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, and let's take further comments as the
Yeah.
conversation goes.
No, I'd like to deep dive into many interesting things you said, right? In fact, the communication piece you said, I have been guilty of that. I was making a poster for this podcast, and I put all the Wi-Fi and all the technology devices as a smart city thing. I might leave it there, but I might choose to change it to some streetscape, maybe like Ponti Bazaar or something like that, and say smart can be different. It need not only be about technology. But coming back to, there are a couple of things. One is the test learn scale kind of with failure built in. I want to get back into that. But the smart cities had two different categories, right? There was the area-based development, which said, if you want to pick up infrastructure development within, you have to identify an area and then submit that as a proposal and do all infrastructure. But there was also a pan city category which said, if you wanted to do technology and all that, you don't have to do it for a small piece. You can do it for the whole city, right? So is that understanding correct?
I'm not in a position right now to exactly clarify that, but my comment there would be that in conversations with cities also, though they had guidance in developing the proposals, I think more handholding to understand how they could envision this, the project, be it pan city or area-based, would have certainly positioned them, setting up better chances of success itself. So
Yeah.
need to cross-check that information, but you might be right that the work there was an option of pan city as well. But I think the majority of cities did take an ABD approach.
Correct. Majority of the cities, because I think the ULBs and coming from where they are comfortable, and as for placemaking also, it became useful. The ABD approach became very useful for us to try out a lot of the physical interventions, because that's where we were lacking. And that's why I should change the picture from digital to physical, which is we really need to focus on the placemaking and getting the basic infrastructure right. And even if the smartness comes in understanding that that is how we are going to be smart by putting better quality physical infrastructure, maybe that serves the purpose as well. But coming to this test learn scale kind of a thing, right? You talked about willingness to fail, willingness to experiment, and that they've learned a lot along the way, that a lot of people along the way. And in my limited interactions with the smart city folks and yourself and other people as well, I find that For looking from the outside, there is a lot of reluctance to government failure for trying things out and failing. They quickly pass a judgment, which is what you said. Everybody is now priming themselves after 5 years of smart city, saying, "Hey, we have learned a lot. Don't lose all these things, right? Why are you just why can't we just continue this? Now we are perfectly gotten into something. We understand what is smart enough. We understand good quality physical infrastructure. We have tried out some nice things. Why leave all the capacity, and where is it going to go? Is it going to, So what is the key essence of this learning from fail? What have you heard inside the corridors that say it's okay to fail, it's okay to learn, because these are pilots, these are things you're doing differently for the first time and you guys are doing something. What have you heard about that?
On a lighter note, I don't know if you keep this or chop this off as well, but then I've realized that, as kids, when all of us were growing up, probably we've had this thing in our mind that our parents had everything sorted and, they knew everything and, the adults, had figured things out in life. It's only until we grew up that we realized that no, they were figuring things out as well. And, they were not perfect either in figuring. So the comparison I had was until I started working with cities itself, I had this perception that the decision making teams and others had everything sorted and the strategies of approaches were, everything was set in place. But I think the urban governance space is extremely challenging, and only once you get into it do you truly appreciate how good decision makers and the engineering teams and others who work with them try to work with the different moving pieces, because if a fund is allocated for a city's budget itself, it's about looking about various factors from healthcare, education to transportation to multiple things, and the finer granularity under that of making it happen. Yes, it's their scope of work and it's about how they do it well. But I think certain decision makers and teams have embraced that approach that we were just discussing about being open to testing out newer models. They know that innovative models, either looking at models from abroad, which can be contextualized, that other Indian cities have done, where peer learning, I think over the last few years have sort of inspired many cities to learn from one another, see how models can be contextualized and used in their space. So they've been open to testing, they've been open to absorbing new ideas and not playing in their safe space, saying that, this is the only workable approach, so hence let's look at only this and invest there. No, they have been open to pushing their boundaries, looking at newer models to test it and capture the learnings. But the very important factor has been to sort of retain those learnings that you briefly touched upon as well, that in a scenario where decision makers or engineering teams keep getting shifted and moving out, it's important to document that learning and set processes in place. Because you have a learning that there is an importance of having, let's say, an empty cell or a committee to meet every month to review the projects to ensure that it goes on. But the moment if some people gets transferred and then the importance of that is lost, then that whole learning goes down. And this applies to our personal lives and all of that as well. So in an institutional setup, it's even more important that the learnings are captured, documented, and embedded in the system as well. And a lot of peer learning is done, which is something which state and national governments could do so that these learnings are inspiring others. For example, the NMT policies, the Healthy Streets policies are an example. Such setups, guidelines are an example where some cities did it. Yes, there are gaps, but it helps through the peer learning spark that learning for the others, and others were like, hey, we can also do it. Tactical urbanism trials is another example that, they saw other cities do it and they took it up. So yeah, that's how it's been. And I think tactical urbanism in particular, I think, is a perfect example of testing and learning. And that's what I think many cities across India have, over the last couple of years, taken it up. Different partner organizations, ITDP, WRI, Save Life and others have been using that model so that they can test the designs, they can learn from it. The stakeholders also realize that, what works, what doesn't, how people behave in that space. To tune the design and then invest more to make it permanent. So I think irrespective of what national, state, or city level model will be there, I think the working teams have sort of absorbed these ideas largely. So hopefully they will continue that in whatever new funding and projects come up in the future as well.
So I think I like the tactical urbanism things because during the course of the podcast, many people have asked me, people like yourselves, ITDP, WRI, and others have been doing a lot of tactical urbanism projects. Why don't we learn more about them? I think we should do a separate topic. We should do a separate session on that, so we can deep dive into some of these examples. And like you said, whether it is Pondy Bazaar or some other experiments that have happened, we need to do more of this. And physical interventions are very visible to people as well, and that's why I think the governments are more attracted to the physical interventions, and the technology pieces are less so. And I think maybe that's why it's seen differently. But the smart thing that was done with the Smart City mission was to create it separately out of the ULB. Initially, I used to think, are you bypassing the ULB? ULB is the urban local body, which is your city corporation. So I always felt that the Smart Cities is probably set up to bypass the city corporations. But now I understand that the ability to experiment and test and fail and get new capabilities inside, when you are firefighting in the city corporation on a daily basis, you probably won't have time to think and do these kind of things. And setting this up separately and getting them to do the experimentation was very useful. And I think as an entity, if it continues to remain an agency to build capacity for the city corporation, I think that's a beautiful setup. It's like you have a separate innovation team which is trying to do a few things, and then when it has got it right and it thinks it is workable, take it over and give it to the corporation and say, hey, you know what, I figured this out, can you guys continue to do this? If that framework was established nicely, I think smart cities can still remain relevant and not be seen as competition to city corporations. Maybe there is a way to see it as a center of excellence or some such thing. And fashioning it that way would be more useful. I realize that there is a way to leverage these capacities that are being built. And unfortunately, not all cities have been doing them appropriately, and a lot of them are still struggling, I feel, with communicating with their local bodies, right? I mean, they are not able to work clearly with the stakeholders. We see those challenges day in and day out, right?
Yeah, just to add 2 cents to that, having engaged with a bunch of ULBs and smart cities across the country, also there are models where, for your audience also to know that, where the smart cities and the ULB have different CEOs or commissioners, where it's two different individuals and they speak to one another and they work together in terms of projects. There are setups where one is slightly within the other. The SPV, the smart cities, is within the ULB and positioned in a slightly hierarchical manner. There are models where it's one and the same commissioner and CEO is looking after both the ULB as well as a smart city as well. So there are pros and cons to each of these approaches, but what certainly doesn't work in general is a siloed approach, where like in any city functioning, where if a department doesn't talk to the other department and does its own projects, there is friction and whatnot. That certainly doesn't work. And certainly there would have been instances across cities where that has been the case also, where if the two entities were separate and were functioning in a siloed approach, like you said, the bypassing and the different dynamics that would pan out in such a situation won't benefit the city. But I think amongst the different ideas, I think that are being brainstormed, and all of us are curious on what the future, etc., would be. But the model that you mentioned is something I think that's also, from what I'm aware of, that's being explored, of how it can be an entity that still continues, but that closely works with the corporation itself to think through and be self-sustaining itself in the long run. So there are different financing mechanisms also that's been explored, so that the team for the Smart Cities SPV can be self-sustaining in the long run. So yeah.
Sure. I want to touch base on that a little bit towards the end, on how you see this going and how I think we can take this forward. Of course, there are many other views I'd like to get on that. But coming to the communication part, right? So government has typically been poor in communication. Most communication that I've seen from the government is only the political ads that come on billboards for elections, or some wear a helmet or put a seatbelt. I haven't seen much communication towards one is external communication. Internal communication, you already told, between the government departments, trying to even coordinate and getting things done has been a challenge for every city in this country. Each one has their own fiefdoms and trying to say, who are you to tell me what to do? Or, we will do it whenever we can. This internal communication is a challenge we'll sort out separately, but external communications, telling people what is happening, how is it happening? Can you see what you see? Why did we do that? Where do you see those kind of, has any of these cities you worked with been of course, not everybody is perfect. Has any examples that stood out to you in communication to the people? Which ones
I
do you
think
think?
the first number one to comment to yours before stating an example, it's extremely critical, like you're mentioning, and especially in the urban governance space of what cities do. And if you look at countries like Singapore, where they even have, if I'm not wrong, a behavioral science team with their communications team that's set up because they understand the importance of messaging information, conveying it in a particular way, and to break it down to an example, for example, it's about creating a shift towards taking up public transportation. When you are in a public transportation system, how do you behave, etc., are things that having a behavioral science expert and a good communication team can help immensely as well. So an example itself, I would say Bhubaneswar is one that came to my mind. The CRUT in Bhubaneswar had done a fantastic job, I think, before the pandemic and the onset of the pandemic. And I think if you go to the Urban Log page, for those of you who are interested in the ITDP website, there's one of the webinars that we've done with so Arun Bothra and team then, where they had, because on the onset of the pandemic, public transportation mode share had dropped heavily because people were skeptical about the COVID spreading from contact in presence of others and whatnot. And a lot of myths were there that had to be busted, and a lot of true facts were there which had to be communicated. So the CRUT team had done like videos of how the public transportation, the bus itself was being disinfected, how vigorously they were doing that, sharing SOPs to the people of how they could use the systems, etc., and putting it out on social media. They had a good social media team as well in place. And they were sharing how after doing these activities, their ridership itself had improved. And the point was to build trust of the people. And I would even applaud like the Chennai, the smart cities team over the last couple of years in particular of how they've also been doing their best to communicate different events that's been happening, the Happy Streets events, to ensure that people know about it, people attend it. So a lot of myths can be busted, a lot of awareness can be built through effective communication. And I think it's an area which capacity needs to be built for the ULB in the future as well. And it's not just a graphic designer's job either. There is a lot of thought that goes into developing narratives, thinking through how to develop a communication strategy and putting it out, etc. There are experts in the field, many good examples that we can learn from other private players and others as well. So it's about getting probably a good team, good agency, good individuals on board to think this through and to do this well. And there has to be a budget allocated for this as well. So in the NMT, or the Healthy Streets policy that we are working with the national challenges for cities to work on, the importance of communication also has been stressed there very much. And through the national challenges, which we might speak a little further as well, cities have shared their feedback to us of how they have realized the importance that communication plays. They have seen the peer learning. They've observed how other cities have fared better in the communication fronts, and now they have upskilled themselves. They have brought communication experts on board as well. And now, so the importance is being felt by cities a lot more today. So let's hope that they sustain that and upskill themselves on the go as well.
So sticking to that communication piece, what I have seen both in my engagement with this whole program and yours and working with all of you guys is now there has been an increased participation of, let's say, civil society, right? It includes planners and people doing tactical urbanism and people like yourselves and bringing in that expertise, and people like myself who have been a bridge to the domain of cycling and walking and public transport and citizen connects and things like that. Why did this? How did this change come across? Is it because you guys are working there that people are thinking about communication and behavioral change and getting messages out to users also to say, hey, while we build things, we want to see your commitment as well, and then touch upon these challenges that you guys created. What is the scope of those? How do those help with? Is it the communication part? Are you looking to do tactical intervention in them? The Streets for People and the Cycles for Change campaign that you guys did. What are those? What are the characters of those? Is it meant for behavioral change? Is it meant for infrastructure? Is it meant for both? Is it meant for everything? How do you characterize them?
Sure. I can give an overview of the challenges initially and then boil it down into detail. So The challenges that we're referring to for is one, the India Cycles for Change Challenge, which was launched initially in June, July of 2020. A few months later, the Streets for People Challenge, and a few months later, the Transport for All Challenge that was launched. It primarily looks at how cities can use the test, learn, scale model of looking at quick pilots on the ground to improve walking and cycling infrastructure, to learn from it. So tactical urbanism trials, primarily crowdsourcing designs through street design competitions as a possible tool. And then making it permanent, number one. So there is what we're calling as a component of action. So to your question, there is an implementation component on the ground. And this is something where we were also trying to encourage cities to embrace the stakeholder participation component, where when they identify the sites, they do that through doing engagement with the citizens in terms of walking audits, handlebar surveys through cycles. So you inform citizens that this is happening. You ask them for which neighborhoods that they would want to select. Within a neighborhood, if you're doing a walking audit, you inform about a day and a time when it's happening, so that you get the interested participants to join. So there are layers of communication to all of this. So the way that we looked at it was that when we were developing the guidance to the cities, we were breaking it down into steps for them to take forward. And each step would have a layer of communication and stakeholder engagement that would be there. So different templates for them to put out on social media, toolkits, etc., were shared to them at that point of time. So that is the action component. The second component was that of institutional pieces, where it's about cities setting up processes in place, like adopting a healthy streets policy, setting up a healthy streets ethics committee or cell, which I touched upon earlier, which is about a process in place to review and monitor projects. Adopting other policies like a parking policy or a street design guidelines, etc., comes under the processes of the institutional pieces. The third and most important one is about building support for walking and cycling, and that has a largely communication-based focus, where that goes into how cities can set up an institutional mechanism for conducting open street events, which some cities have done. How can they do that? Learnings from other cities, cycle training camps, which many cities have taken it up today, and different other models to get people to, one, be involved in the process of developing the designs and implementation, and number two, to understand the importance and to embrace walking and cycling in the cities as well, was the third category part. So that's where even the idea of cycle to work campaigns to bring a behavior change, etc., is being explored right now through campaigns like the Freedom to Walk and Cycle that we are collaborating with Altmo on. So these are the three broader verticals of action, which is implementation focused of doing a trial and then making it permanent. Institutional one of processes, and number three, behavioral pieces coming under the building support for walking and cycling. And cross-cutting, it's about now cities have done some projects and learned from it. So how can you incorporate the learnings and look at a 3-year vision? So we're calling it as a 3-year action plan for them to take it forward. So incorporating the steps ahead for all these three verticals into like creating a network plan, an area-based plan. What is your plan to take forward your communication, and then layers of budget, etc., is being looked into the 3-year action plan, which the cities who are participating in the challenges are working on right now. So I've touched more upon the Streets for People and Cycles for Change challenges. I think the Transport for All challenge will require an in-depth discussion of its own, not going there right now.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, Transport for All is a larger campaign. I think we need to look at public transport is playing a huge part in these cities, and these two campaigns have done extremely well, because I have been watching the progress for quite a while, and a lot of experimentation has happened. And I think, so would you say that after so many years of experimentation with various different pieces, have any of these smart cities said this is what works here, and I kind of think we know where we are going with these things, or are they still, is there any more phases of experimentation that is required, or is the experimentation in the same thing, or are they doing it differently? Because I don't think it can be indefinite experiments, right? You spend X amount of years doing experimentation, but you have to know how to conclude and say this is what works here, I'm going to do this now, and finalize on something. Have any of them reached the stage of saying I've learned something?
Tricky question for me to respond to. I think it's a conversation that we should have with the cities themselves and the decision makers.
Yeah, I think so.
I can share from my
just an observation from your side. Yeah.
So, answer would be that I would say that yes, that learning certainly have been there. Many of them have realized what works, what doesn't work in their city. So, guidance is being shared to many cities at large. There's peer learning. They probably realize that this doesn't work in their city, or this particular approach works in their city that is there. So, from the pieces that I mentioned earlier, I think the primary thing of the importance of having looking at any project for that matter, because we've had team members from cities get back to us saying that they've been able to use this process of action, foundation, communication, and test, learn, scale, not just in mobility project, but in other projects also. This approach is applicable, and they've been trying to use that lens as being a positive feedback that's come up. So that is one. And the approach to projects also, if you take an implementation piece, the importance of engaging with the community. And again, there it's not a silver bullet of this is the way that you can do it. There are only if you do it and do it multiple times will you understand different ways to approach different stakeholders. So uh, the fact that many cities who were not at all open to it and have not tried this in the past actually tried it. They're open to it right now, and now they've been using that in other projects they've done. Many cities have understood the importance of getting designers on board, either empaneling them or hiring them, and from Nagpur to Newton, Kolkata to many others now, they've embraced that. They're getting good design consultants on board to do it. So all of these I would count it under the learning part. And the importance of parking management in cities, for example, that when they saw how few cities who had initiated parking management have been able to address the concerns of encroachment in the cycle tracks that they were designing, in the streets that they were designing, they've learned the importance of that, which was not the story before. And they have now brought on board consultants to assess the parking demand, to bring parking management in the city. So these are some of the examples to share right now.
Yeah, so I do think it was a bit harsh when I said, have they finished learning? I don't think you can ever finish learning. I think you need to keep doing whatever it is and putting it out there, and testing is always live, and you can tweak them and you can keep moving on. So yeah, you're right. I think, but as Venu and Satya, the two individuals who work with all these people, I think we can definitely make some conclusions which may not be official from the smart city side. And I think we should try to understand as individuals, where do we see these kind of things going? Because I have heard that the smart cities mission is definitely coming to an end in its earlier avatar of how it was envisioned or whatever. There could be ways in which it might be, because I don't know how much we know about that. But do you see theoretically, without having any official information that we may have access to, do you think theoretically the ability of the central government to keep some form of this engagement going, which is a center funded center of excellence for cities, let's just frame it that way for conversation purpose, where you can test, learn, scale, and help the city corporations, or ULB as we call it, to build more capacity within them? It could be, need not be done here alone. It can be done in the corporation or some such form of, like you said, there are different models that people have adopted, whether it is subservient, whether it is a part of the corporation or it is separate. Either which way, if this thing is experimenting, if this entity is experimenting, do you see this going forward? What do you see the future of this form of engagement? They may not be called smart cities. They may be called that some, I don't know, maybe whatever it is. This form of engagement, is it valuable? Is it valuable for people like you and me to engage in on one hand and work differently from the firefighting that the corporations usually do, where they have no bandwidth to experiment anything, and you and I go and stand there, they have no time or bandwidth. They may have interest, but they may always say, I would go fix the road there and the train there, right? You please come back later. That happens. They're truly busy. You see any future for this form of engagement?
So my reflection on this is that how there has always been a lot of importance given and budget allocated at the national level or state city level for infrastructure projects in India, as cities are growing, booming, and the way India is positioned to grow in the decade to come. So I think the importance and investments in the infrastructure space will continue to be there at all these levels. And one is to show that, give that importance, and like you said, in a different name, a different avatar, it would continue to be there. And but my reflection is that it'll be very important for the states as well and the cities to take responsibility themselves, irrespective of anything, and how much or the approach that the national support comes in. for the state and the cities to have a clear vision of how they see the projects to go forward. Because I think the fundamental point, which I think we echoed in one of your earlier podcasts as well, and we've discussed this in the past, that when there are conflicting ideologies on how a city should progress, when there are different projects that have conflicting ideologies that are where budget is invested, then that itself affects the fundamental approach. You know where I'm getting at, when there's investments for flyovers and there is less investments for public transportation, but a few crores being allocated for some streets, public spaces. There is a lack of clarity of what the vision for a particular city is. And this is something which cities and states themselves, can prioritize and clarify. And that is the fundamental thing, in my perspective, that will have to be addressed, irrespective of any quantum of funding that's allocated at any level. Because once you address this, which some cities and states are in the process of doing this through an active mobility bill in Karnataka and some policies and good measures that are taken by different cities, then it's a matter of, you know what direction that you need to work towards, and what the priority projects and what projects not to prioritize are. Then I think there is no limit to how you could achieve that, because there are different models of, looking at funding and financing for projects as well, be it through innovative mechanisms of bonds and public-private partnerships to external development bank partnerships like the World Bank Chennai City partnership that's there in Chennai. So there are different ways of engagement to ensure how you can make this happen. But I think the concern here is not having the money per se. I would say yes, certainly having adequate budget is important, but if you don't have that proper vision and approach and roadmap ahead, that's where the issue happens, where you do multiple things cross-cutting in nature. They sort of affect one another, and that affects the larger scheme of things itself. So setting that vision in place and plan in place, which was the essence of what an UMTA should be doing, that NUTP at our cities, I think that still is the silver bullet, I would say, that cities should be getting right.
I guess it's very well said, Vedo. The vision is definitely not there. It seems to be a completely market-driven approach. I wouldn't even call it a true market. It's misnomer. It's basically saying that a particular industry is driving infrastructure development, and we forget we call it ideology, but I just feel that it is basic common sense to have equitable development and giving public commons to a lot more modes, a lot more fairly. If not equally. The vision is definitely not there. And second thing is the contestations at the city level has become like, if I'm a big city, I have my own ways of doing these things. Why don't you take all this to the small cities? And I also feel more and more, I observe that it has become extremely transactional for the relationship between the center and the city, forget the state, is to say that unless there is money on the table, whatever it is, just put it out there easily for us to get. We are not going to engage in deep thought on these kind of things, right? It's not everywhere. Some cities are more driven than others. It is very unfair to generalize this and call them as cities, but I noticed that a few cities are really driven because they just want to do the right thing. A few others are just lackadaisical. I don't know if it is the leadership or it is just some people who don't really care. We need a broad-based. We have Vision Group. If I'm sitting in Bangalore, I can tell you. Sitting in Chennai, I don't know. They've done some good stuff. There are a lot more. Hyderabad is doing some good stuff. Sitting here in Bangalore, I don't know if the leadership is capacitated well enough to think. There is a Vision Group also, a set of good bunch of people. I know them, who they are. I don't know what it's achieving because the Vision Group is there and the transactional relationships are completely different. But concluding thoughts, on this experiment of the challenges way of approaching is that, because I have heard that anywhere in the government, if you give a mission mode of working, it is far more successful than generally throwing money at them. You give a mission, give a target, and get it done. How successful have these challenges been, in your personal opinion? What more could be done in engaging in the way of creating these challenges and campaigns and things like that? Is a challenge a good way of doing these things? Has the challenges you have created, has it gone in the direction you have envisioned? Has it led to the right successes? And do you think that is the way to engage with these kind of entities?
Yeah, I would say that the cycles of change, future people, transport for all challenges in the onset of the pandemic, that phase when the ULBs also were, confined all of us were in our homes, unable to step out, and there were limitations there. People were getting more open to the format of webinars and online discussions, which was not happening until then. And it was hard to imagine like an urban local body meeting happening online and people joining in. It was not as common a thing as it is today. But people became open to that, and it was then it was a unique model, then a challenge approach where you could mainstream capacity building at scale. You could facilitate peer learning between different cities through this model. And hence, I would say 3 years down the line, if we are to look at a challenge model today, we would definitely take the learnings that have been there, but certainly not look at the exact model right now, because at that point of time, then it worked perfectly for a year and a half, 2 years, etc. But as life came to normalcy and a lot of other projects that the cities took up, etc. There have been, learnings for us also on how certain approaches and strategies that we have used have worked, certain things haven't worked. So I would say that the best part of the challenge approach is the value add it brings in mainstreaming capacity building to cities at large across the city. What I mentioned about peer learning that it facilitates, and then offline workshops also is a model where cities can come together, share their learnings, etc. And I think similar models, the CITIIS, the cities 1.0 and now 2.0 is on the card as well, that KFW and AFT is funding, that NIU is holding together. It has a slightly similar model where cities apply for it. There is a cohort of cities that are shortlisted. But I would say that in such model challenges, or the good part is that when you have clear directions that are set for the city of what all to work towards, when the guidelines is broken down to you broadly of, these are the steps, and then for them to brainstorm and think through how to do, facilitate a lot of peer learning brainstorming so that they can learn from one another, see how other cities will approach it, etc. I think those are the essence pieces that we should pull out from these models that are there, so that any new model that is thought through, or challenges or otherwise, can use these benefits going forward. So right from, for example, for the information of the other audience groups, there's a WhatsApp group that we've been using for the challenges. So there used to be a lot of messages, questions of how to do something, how some other city has done. One engineer from Silvassa asking a city from Gangtok to vice versa. So I think these have been some plus points which needs to be embraced in any model that we take forward.
On that beautiful note, thank you, Venu, for being on the show. I'd like to take you up on your offer and come back and see how ITTP has done the tactical interventions, or actually they're quite permanent in Chennai now. More and more people want to see those things and the learnings from that, and maybe we'll do that separately, and the transport for all as well. Let's talk about that in a separate episode. Thank you very much for being on the show, and viewers, see you all next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.